Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's session on diversity in STEM and its impact on India's economy. Before we begin, I would like to inform the audience to keep your video and mic off. Please share your questions in the chat box. Questions will be taken at the end of the discussion. With that, I welcome everyone on the International Day for Women and Girls in Science. I am Shreya Naidu, Science Communicator at MSSRF. I am joined by Dr. Gayatri Venkatraman, Scientist at MSSRF, to moderate this session today. We have an amazing panel with us today. I'd request them to share their videos. We are joined today by Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, Chairperson of MS Swaminathan Research Foundation. Dr. Soumya Swaminathan was formerly the WHO Chief Scientist and Director General of ICMR. She is very well known for her extensive work in tuberculosis and HIV research. Welcome, ma'am. Dr. Ravinder Kaur, she is a professor in the Humanities and Social Sciences Department of IIT Delhi. Her work on research and advocacy on gender equality spans over 2 decades. Thank you so much for being here. We welcome Dr. Karishma Kaushik, who is a physician, scientist, microbiologist, and author of The Real Deal, Lessons, Learnings, and Laughter of Girl Scientists. Thank you so much for coming in. Welcome, Karishma. And finally, we have Nandita Jairaj. She's a science communicator and author of Lab Hopping, a very interesting book on the journey to find India's women in science. Thank you so much, all of you, for being with us today, to speak about gender representation and its impact on India's economy. We're right at 12:15, so I'll move in with the questions, and I hope that the audience joining in will enjoy the discussions that will ensue. So, to Dr. Soumya and Dr. Ravinder, I want to help I need your help in setting the context for this session today. And so broadly, if you could perhaps share what are some of the major concerns that are affecting women today and thereby affecting the nation's growth. Perhaps Dr. Soumya?
Sure. Thank you, Shreya and Gayatri for having put this together, and many thanks to Ravinder, Karishma, Nandita for joining in this discussion. So I think when we talk about women in STEM, I think there are issues which are very similar globally. So I think everything we discuss is not unique to India. It is very similar in other countries because patriarchy and the male domination of science is something that is a global. It is the situation globally, and there have been many analyses looking particularly at recognition of women scientists, like, for example, the percentage of women Nobel Prize awardees or percentage of women in the Royal Society and so on in the sciences. And there's also been analysis looking at leadership positions of scientific institutions and even global health institutions. And not only are these dominated by men, but they are often dominated by men from high-income countries or people who've had an education in Western countries. This is at the global level. In India also, we are all aware that over the last decade or two, the percentage of girls entering the STEM disciplines has been steadily rising and is now almost half. And in fact, in many even engineering colleges, I'm told that even women may be crossing the 50% mark at entry. But when you go up the seniority, you see that this keeps dropping off. Heads of departments, and certainly at the level of heads of institutions, you have very few women. Take the IITs, ISAs, and so on as examples of how many women there are in our national research and science bodies. So We talk about Chandrima Shah, for example, as being the first woman who was president of INSA in its 90-year history. I was the second director general of the woman director general of the ICMR after Dr. Padmavati. So Satyavati, sorry. And similarly, in our other side, I think DST probably we've not had a woman secretary and so on. So the leadership is where I think the issues come, and that is where there will be a lot of also papers written about it, analyses done, and solutions proposed. So I will let the others come in here. But one thing that I would like to say is that for a young woman, there is a tension between the scientific clock and the biological clock. And while this does apply for men and women, I think because we know that women bear the larger share and responsibilities of child rearing and care at home, whether it's care of the elders, care of disabled, care of children. This burden is something that could stop women from wanting to take up leadership positions because of the fear that they may need to spend an inordinate amount of time to advance their careers and whether that's going to impact their other responsibilities, caregiving in particular. So one thing that the state needs to do is step up and provide more caregiving, whether it's for children or elderly or disabled, at workplaces as well as at the community level. For women in all occupations, so I'm not talking about this only women in STEM, because this is a general problem faced by women, and this is why we see very low participation of women in the workforce, and why the government keeps talking about that figure as being very low compared to other countries, and why we need to improve there. In fact, of all the women in manufacturing in India, 43% are in Tamil Nadu, and this could be because both public transport, safety, hostels for accommodation, and other facilities are provided so that women can safely live and work particularly in an industrial, we're talking about industrial setting here. So for women in STEM also, this is going to be a common issue that comes up. And a part of it is being diffident. I think there is some of that. Some are structural and systemic barriers, but there are also barriers of just being a woman and underestimating your own capabilities and not putting yourself forward for a position that you could actually do a good job in. I'll stop there with my remarks and turn it over to Ravinder.
So I think our next questions are posed to Dr. Ravinder. Your report, which is on the study of underperformance of students at IIT Delhi, it's identified a gap, and how has it translated into the Gati policy, and have these actionables been actually translated into practical impact? And I understand that the Gati focuses primarily on IITs. I think if you look at the STEM field, and I'm not talking of STEM, if you also include mathematics and now you look at biology beyond that, you have more women in the biology workforce than you have in other STEM. So what are the implications of your Gati research on the research that has come out at IIT at the policy level, and also in the biology area, what are the implications also for women here?
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the panel. I will maybe quickly add to what Professor Soumya has already covered. I think a lot of the state of affairs plus some of the possible reasons. I mean, I always like to use these two, biases and barriers. Both exist, and especially biases in the male-dominated institutions, which prevent women even from entering IITs, elite institutions. I want to say a couple of things. First of all, I think the leaky pipeline and the broken pipeline are real issues. And we have 44% of women graduating in STEM, but only 27% in the workforce. But I think what is more worrisome is that the loss is at the PhD level. And if you see the statistics, then about 51% of women are graduating with 49% of women are graduating with science PhDs, and 33% in engineering and technology. So those are, there's been a huge growth in the number of people graduating with PhDs percentage. And yet, when you look at the workforce, they just aren't there, or they're there in much smaller numbers. About 37% enter academia and 18% enter research. But I want to quickly give a breakup of the women in academia. You will find that 43.6% are in colleges, 18% in central universities, 17% in NITs, and only 11% in IITs. So women are being allowed to enter the basement of, let us say, academia, but not allowed to rise to the top. And I think it's really important to pay attention to the women in colleges because, as Professor Swaminathan also pointed out, and as Nandita's book also shows, they don't have the resources for research. Colleges also do not enable them to continue the research that they might have. And yet we find, nearly 50% are there. So I think this is a very important issue to be looking into. And then it needs to be addressed. Many of the reasons we already know, but the problem is that they don't get addressed because policy continues to be made by male leaders. So also I feel that one cannot overemphasize the importance of diversity in STEM to remove biases and enable sustainable solutions to local and global problems. We are all familiar with how biases get replicated in all kinds of research, even in the solutions. Institutions don't have a gender lens. And I also feel that, women's presence in science and technology may actually decline with the rise in, areas like AI, etc., etc. Women are globally about 22% in AI. To respond to your questions on Gati, first of all, Gati was not meant only for the IITs. In fact, Gati is based on the UK's Athena Swan Equality Charters program, and it was the pilot that DST introduced. It had 30 institutions across the country, and there were NITs, IITs, DRDO labs, universities like Kashmir University. So it was a whole range of institutions, very small in size, very large or in size, just science institutions, only research and teaching. So it was a pretty wide variety. At IIT Delhi, I was leading that gender equity self-assessment based on the Gati pro forma. And I must say that, looking at it in hindsight, it has had quite an influence on how things have changed at IIT Delhi. At least people are now conscious of the gender inequalities. So there has been a lot of focus on reviewing recruitment processes to see that women are not, being not shortlisted or called for interviews due to biases that exist at the department level. We are also beginning to view infrastructure through a gender lens. Just as was pointed out, people think classrooms are important, labs are important, but they don't think creches and daycare, etc., is important. So I know I should not take too much time, but I'll just add a couple of other things about Gati. So Gati is meant to be a process of continuous evaluation. You evaluate, you make action plans, so-called smart action plans. The institution is meant to implement them, and then you review again. That somehow has not happened. It became like a one-time thing. And I think leadership needs to be approached and be made accountable by DST also. DST itself, I'll be very upfront, seems to have dropped the ball on this because the idea was also that, Gati will be spread to all institutions in the country because it places responsibility on institutions to bring about the transformation and the change. So as a top-down initiative, it forced leaders in these institutions to take cognizance of, gender inequalities and biases in the country's institutions. On your question about biology, so STEM basically is science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And if you add another M, that is medical sciences. Now, we all know that, there are far more women in biology. I mean, the representation in chemistry actually is the worst. So we've been doing a lot of data work across the country. Chemistry has the worst representation of female faculty. And when more than 50% of girls are doing chemistry in their education, so there's another big leaky pipeline there. So biology basically does have more women and lot more women doing PhD. But if you look at ICAR, there's only 20% researchers there. So the same kind of pattern repeats itself. I mean, people here will be familiar that if you look at the medical field, NEET, a lot more girls are sitting for NEET, qualifying, although, now the graph is rising towards the men. Their inclusion is improving, even though currently there are more women in medicine. But if you go to super specializations, if you go to surgery, etc., you'll find the number starts getting reduced. So that whole idea about the basement, women are being let into the basement. But as Dr. Swaminathan also said, unless they are in leadership, and IITs have, not a single director, a female director, many other institutions. I think women's representation at all positions, in terms of decision-making bodies, leaderships, is extremely important if we think, if the scenario is to be changed. I think I'll stop here and come back later if needed.
Thank you for your comments, and so I think
this was really amazing stats, and I think there are a lot of overlaps in Nandita and Dr. Karishma's book that's mentioning a lot of these as well. So perhaps Nandita, I'll pose this question to you and then to Karishma because your book is more recent, so I would like to see if there's a difference in the experiences that you're sharing. So a lot of the problems that Dr. Ravinder mentioned, these are basically missing social structures for women to excel. Are there any cases, examples, or your experiences that you can probably highlight of how that's affected women's growth within the leadership, or perhaps even positive instances of where support was given and there has been positive change? Perhaps Nandita and then Karishma.
Sure. I think one thing that in our book in Lab Hopping that Ashima and I try to emphasize really is about the missing institutional structures rather than the missing social, rather than everything that's wrong with the social structures. Because as people, as girls and women who've grown up in our country, lived these social realities, we know very intimately about what is possible, what is not, and how to navigate these challenges. And in our own capacity, all of us have tried to change things, and this is something we saw pretty uniformly when we were traveling around the country interviewing women scientists. We saw these remarkably clever, courageous, and innovative, sometimes risky ways that young women were navigating these limiting social factors while they were pursuing education and a career. What constantly stood out to us more was not the personal or the societal failure, but the institutional failure to meet these people midway, these young women who are trying to enter and progress in science. And as authors and as journalists, we felt the responsibility to go beyond this very tired narrative of, society is the villain, we need to change mindsets and all of that. One example, of course, and I think this has already come up, Dr. Soumya and Ravinder also spoke about, is the obvious thing really is childcare. And I thought I wouldn't speak about it if somebody is already done, but since you gave me the first turn, I will. And of course, you can say that the societal structure is there. It dictates that mothers or women be the primary caregivers throughout the childhood of the child, and later women with elder care. That responsibility has fallen on us for probably centuries. And now we can either sit and wait for the structure to change, and it is very slowly changing. But we can't just do that, right? Institutions also have to do something to make things easier on women who still have that responsibilities. And this can only be done if daycare centers, which are actually mandated, are made like a top priority, as important as getting a new expensive gadget. As prestigious as that is for an institute, it should be just as celebrated to have a daycare center there. And this shouldn't be only when there are women in the workplace. It should also be irrespective of the gender, because you want to send the signal that childcare is not a woman's responsibility. And at the same time, employees need to be sensitized that maternity leave is not just a vacation. And proactively, we should make sure that women are not being judged or being disadvantaged because they take these 6 months off, or because they need to leave sharp at 5 p.m., or because they need to take a short break to pick up school kids. So sometimes I feel like, instead of we should instead appreciate this time management and maybe upskill men to be able to do this kind of multitasking, because it benefits science. So many scientists we've met said that this attitude and this ability of women, which has emerged out of a survival tactic, actually benefits science, because they're able to do so much more in the same amount of time. And there have been studies also. I think one that comes to mind is by the Indian Academy of Science and Rohini Godbole and a few sociologists who did this survey of, I think, more than 200 women and men in science, and they found that very, I can't, I unfortunately don't have the stats with me right now, but it did append a lot of preconceived notions that we have, that women actually spend lesser time than men at work, and the way they use their time. It was very, very illuminating. So, and when it comes to solutions, I think our book, even though I don't know, sometimes I always fear that our book is too pessimistic, but when I actually look at it, it's full of positive example. It's full of really creative ways that these challenges have been managed. And I really think that solutions, we have them. Ravinder is talking about Gati, and then there is the science and tech policy that was supposed to come out in 2020. And then there are all these women's schemes as menstrual leave policy coming up in places. All of these things are there. So I think as a country, we have plenty of solutions that are there, and the gap really is in implementation. So sometimes every time there's a new solution that comes in, I feel more disheartened, because I feel like, okay, in 2 years, this is going to lose steam, or just, somebody is going to drop the ball. So I think that let's work with the solutions we have and just make sure that is happening.
Thanks so much, Nandita. And before I pass the question to you, Karishma, perhaps you could also speak about, you were leading a lab and you had so many female students as well. Perhaps you could also speak to the multiplier effect that encourages more women representation.
Certainly. Thank you. It's great to be here. The stage has been well set. I think definitely institutions need to be, I'll talk about my experiences as well in a bit, but institutions need to be held accountable for sure. I also think there are some administrative and bureaucratic processes that haven't been changed, possibly since independence, that preclude the full participation of women in prestigious, lucrative, long-term jobs. For example, India hires in our scientific workforce, at least in the top institutes, based on age cutoffs. We all know that women often end up taking time off career breaks. In fact, there was a study by Niti Aayog that said the first career break for an Indian woman in STEM is after marriage. This is before first child, probably because of relocation and adjusting to a new household and new family structure. The second career break happens after first child. That is also the time when they would be seeking these positions, right, after a postdoc. And so they tend to lose years. Indian institutions still hire based on draconian cutoffs like 32 years and 35 years, as though our gray cells start depleting at 35 years. We know that's not true. The other thing is our incentive structures. I was very hopeful that the Yuva, the Vigyan Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, the revamped Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Awards would take age into consideration. Unfortunately, even in the revamped model, the age cutoff to be eligible for the award was 45 years and a permanent position, both of which set to make it a very hard task for women in that demographic. So unfortunately, that turned out to be old wine in a new bottle. Coming to my research group, I'll take off from where I started, which is the leadership gap actually starts with a position gap very early in women's careers. Extremely capable, accomplished women find themselves left out of long-term, lucrative, prestigious positions. If you look around you, and I hope what I say will change the way you look at institutions, you will find short-term, contractual, unstable, precarious jobs and roles are overwhelmingly occupied by women scientists, because that is what they could access given various systemic social structural barriers. So the leadership gap happens very early. When I started at a state university, and coming to my own personal experiences, I was geographically limited to Pune. I returned to India on a Ramalinga Swami re-entry fellowship, something that many male scientists in my age and stage in their career would not choose to do, right? A fellowship is temporary after all. A state university is also where I hosted my fellowship. State universities are known to have a lot of women. And as Nandita's book Lab Hopping does state, because women tend to occupy positions of scientist teachers much more than independent researchers or faculty. And men tend to occupy these positions much less. State universities also have their challenges. Apart from childcare, which was non-existent, if I remember, creche, breastfeeding rooms were non-existent. What was also non-existent was sanitary restrooms. I think women in science don't talk about this enough. The psychological safety of not being able to use a restroom where the lock works, the flush works, which basically meets standards of hygiene and sanitation. So while I did enable lots of women who came into my research group, we had an open policy. I saw in them my career, my journey. They've all gone on to do very well. I think we are working within the constraints that even women who have supposedly made it, or mid-career women who have managed to survive the system, we are all operating within frameworks as this. I think I've been very transparent about the driving factors in my career journey in my book as well. So I'll leave it at that for now.
For very beautifully summarizing what are the issues, and maybe it's probably institutional which we need to address. So I think this is a question we'd like to pose to all from MSSRF working with rural communities, and maybe we'll first go with Dr. Samya for this. So what can be done to support rural participation in STEM education with a visible pathway to STEM careers and local employability? So I think the perspective for this question is women want an education for getting an employability. They're not looking for very high career positions, but local employability is a very, very important factor. So are there some answers that can be made available? Maybe we'll go with the panelists and ask for what their opinions on this are. Dr. Samya, maybe you can just start first.
Yeah. So I think I also want to bring up the issue of diversity in various scientific disciplines. One, of course, we're here focusing on the male-female ratio or the gender balance, but we also have to remember the intersectionalities which exist in India, and there are a lot of inequities which prevent certain groups, communities from accessing, because they just have less resources and less opportunities. So I would like for us to remember also that all women also cannot be bracketed into the same bucket, that some women do have family and other support to enable them to take some of those risks, to enable them to do things. Maybe they have more family support even for care and so on. or can employ somebody who will provide care to their child. Everyone can't do that, right? So I think that when we talk about how to enable, we also have to look at that. So, for example, we run an Every Child a Scientist program at MSSRF. This is a program that was started by Professor M.S. Swaminathan many years ago, using one of the prizes that he got to launch it. It basically enables children studying in government schools, in this case in Chennai Corporation schools, to come and spend 15 days in the foundation, interacting and talking to large number of scientists. Of course, in this case, it's mostly the life sciences, and also doing a lot of hands-on experiments, going to the lab, uh, even simple things like looking under a microscope at a cell. They would not have done it in their school, because these government schools don't have labs for these young children, 6th to 8th grade. They only are enabled to go to a computer lab or to a science lab once they are in the senior classes. So they learn a lot of theory without really being able to visualize or get excited by science. So I think we have to start at the school level, especially by getting kids curious, really kindling their, and they're so curious. They're like sponges actually at that age. The number of questions they ask, they want to know so much more. Giving them access to books, to libraries. Karnataka has a wonderful scheme of rural libraries. So I think rather than focusing only on higher academic institutions, we actually need to start from schools. And there are many initiatives in India also, but they are far too few to cover the majority of children who go through school only doing rote learning and really don't get exposed to science. So I think examples like Mangalyaan and Chandrayaan and all that really have inspired millions of young girls, because they see the women in ISRO. So we need many more such stories and examples out there where they see. So yesterday I asked this group, which is currently in our foundation, which occupations do you think girls cannot do, that only boys can do? So the girls actually kept quiet. The boys came up with a few occupations which only boys can do, which included being in the army, the police, and carpentry. And then everyone agreed later that no, that there are no occupations that women actually cannot. So there is nothing, no barrier that prevents. It's only a matter of wanting to do it and enabling. So then, because from there we need to also expose them to all the different kinds of opportunities that exist today in this field. Not everybody needs to do a PhD. So I think this whole area of skilling as well, and being able to get a job, as you pointed out, Gayatri, for many people, it is a matter of getting a job. And education is an end to means to a job. They cannot just carry on forever, exploring or studying. So for those people, I think the kind of courses IIT Madras, for example, is launching, which are more skill-oriented courses, which even after a class 12, you can join. I think they've just launched a BS in aeronautics, if I'm not mistaken, which is an online program. And they've also said that there would be a fee discount given to people from underprivileged. I think we need many more of those from our elite institutions, but also from our state and central universities, which are more skills building, where women could start off working in a lab, perhaps as a lab assistant or something, and then gradually they may be able to study and go further, but at least they'll have a job and an exposure to an environment. Thanks.
Sorry. And also, I think it ties into what Karishma says. Given the social structures that women support, more in India probably than outside India, the age barriers that are prescribed, technically for being eligible need to be looked in a more relaxed sense, I think. So that would also be very helpful, to ensure these kind of structures have more women come into STEM and then retain them in STEM, because your interest in science may remain. But for example, for me personally, by the time I was 35, I was too old to be an ECRA, and I was too young to act, so yeah, so those barriers perhaps also. Yeah.
Can I add one thing to this? So Gayatri, since Karishma also brought up age limits, and I just wanted to point out one recent something that took place very recently that made me realize that age limits are there. People are willing to bend age limits if there is a will. We think of it as, it's set in stone, it can never change. But this very stark example that happened during this recently concluded science festival, where there was an award announced for science communicators who are also scientists, and it was called Rising Indian Science Communicator. But their criteria said that it has to be somebody who's a full-time scientist employed, which again is an exclusionary factor. But more than that, it was supposed to be for below 35. So I was approached to give some nominations for this award, and I was completely gobsmacked because it was so hard to find somebody under 35 has an active job at a institution and who is doing science, sustained effort in science communication. And I wrote back to them, and I think many others also did. And after about a couple of weeks, they said, okay, we're reducing it to 40. And somehow I racked my brain and actually sent them 7 nominations, of which 6 were of women and 1 was of a male scientist from a college in Mangalore, where I am. And ultimately, the person who won was in his late 50s at TIFR, a very established scientist, science communicator whose work I admire and everything. But I don't know what happened. How did they bend the rules to suddenly become 55 or 60? And it's really curious how these things happen. But it showed me that it can be done, like you can change rules.
So I just add that, Nandita, I was also approached. Its whole experience is very familiar. And I also got back saying 35 or 40 is far too young. But anyway, I just want to underscore that I know this experience. Sure.
So yes, continuing with so a visible pathway for employability in rural areas. Would anyone else also like to come in on this?
May I just add to this age discussion? It's also that, career breaks of men and women get looked at very differently. We know that, women take the career breaks when they get married or when they have children. When they reapply or want to come back, the typical response is that, oh, they must have forgotten their basics. How can they teach? In fact, this is from an actual quote that I'm talking about. Men generally take career breaks, they'll go to industry or something or the other. And when they come back, the response is, oh, they have polished their CVs, they've gained so much experience. So what is working for one gender in one way, it's working the opposite for another. And these are the kinds of entrenched biases. Even in labs, we find that, women are considered as less productive due to, disruptive bodily problems like menstruation or pregnancy, etc. And we find, this is also again from research at my own institution, that men then tend to favor male students, giving them more meaty projects, prestigious projects, and the women are, so their journey of getting disenchanted, even with aiming high, starts during the PhD itself. And as you said, all the infrastructure problems contribute to how productive they can be. It's also, the turn to what we call the neoliberal university, that it's demanding more and more of a 24/7 presence. And that is really possible again only for men. Networking is something that we have not talked about, almost next to impossible for women. And while we were interviewing women leaders, there a very interesting quote came up that networking in elite academic institutions is really, where people take walks at night with the director or the deputy director. That's like the golf course in the corporate world, where decisions are made on the golf course. Here, decisions are being made at night time by males who are walking together or whatsoever. And can you ever imagine a woman professor accompanying a male, director or a deputy director on a night walk or walking at night? So these are, some of the challenges that are not even recognized. So networking is, we know, extremely important for entering leadership. But if women do not have those opportunities, then obviously there'll be very few. Sometimes they are appointed, like one of the effects of Gati was that the previous director appointed a lot of women to senior positions. And before that, women in IIT Delhi would only be given the position of Associate Dean for Student Welfare, because it was thought women are compassionate, they'll be suited to this particular type of role. And all the so-called hard roles, Dean Planning, Dean Infrastructure, Dean Faculty, everything went to men. So that has changed somewhat in many institutions. And I think it's the presence of critical actors that is very important to bring about that change, which then, becomes difficult to overturn when other successes follow. To come back quickly to, I totally agree with the intersectionality aspect. It's very important. And I think starting young is also very important. I think now a lot of institutions have STEM mentorship outreach programs. IIT Delhi also has one, and it's been quite successful. IIT Bombay has, IIT Madras has for rural girls. IIT Bombay also has a residential summer program for rural girls. So this is one way of, trying to to inspire younger women or young girls. And I think hands-on work like tinkering, being introduced to labs, etc., being let into the precincts of these prestigious institutions itself is very inspiring. Just to close on that, what we are doing in our project is also to build gender inclusion modules, which we will at some point, launch for anyone who's interested in adopting them. So one is on the STEM mentorship. So it's like a handbook, how to do it. Because institutions often don't know, what they should be getting together in order to launch a program. So those kinds of things hopefully would also be helpful. But I think it's really important and hands-on. Last thing that, how we envision STEM itself is something that we need to relook at. I'm not sure, but if people, maybe Nandita and Ashima also brought it up in their book, that women who have so much knowledge of land, forest, the environment, etc. And there are gendered perspectives from experiences on sustainable solutions also. So why does STEM not take cognizance of local knowledges? I think we need to broaden our understanding of, only the university-based people as being STEM people.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that comes to the formal question of what is knowledge, formal and informal systems. And like Dr. Ravinder pointed out, you have knowledge which is local, which is built, and which is really important and probably not recorded in the formal sense. So within that perspective, you have this language around development and gender. And also, many times women are identified as stakeholders. They should be identified as stakeholders and not as beneficiaries. So, Dr. Soumya, would you like to comment on the formal versus informal knowledge systems and the repository of this knowledge being women as stakeholders and not beneficiaries? Dr. Soumya?
Yeah, I think that women have always had a lot of, knowledge on more traditional, from more traditional sources. I think that they are the um, holders of such knowledge. I'm talking about women, for example, that we work with in some of our tribal areas or in our coastal areas, where they understand so much about the cropping patterns, the weather, the factors that influence yield, things which a scientist who's developing a hybrid variety in a lab may or may not appreciate. And so I think we as scientists also tend to overlook or underappreciate the traditional wisdom of people who are actually practicing science in their day to day. We don't call it science, but I think if you look at agriculture or farming, in a way, it is a science, but it is a very hands on, practical knowledge that they have. And that, unfortunately, is not considered. I was very happy to see recently that one of the state governments, now which state was it, has actually decided to award PhDs for, it's in China, sorry, it was not in India. That's why I couldn't think of which state it is. China is now awarding PhDs based on practical work. So the first two PhDs have been awarded to two candidates who never submitted a thesis, but one of them developed a new way of building bridges, I think, a structural design, which was novel and has actually been implemented in China to build some large bridges. And so he received a PhD. Similarly, I think now there are many institutions, including IITs, which are appointing professors of practice, but they're still all academics. I think we need to start appointing professors of practice who are people actually with traditional knowledge. And why not also give them PhDs? And I'm happy that one of the farmers we work with, Raimati Guria, is now the recipient of two honorary doctorates from two different universities in Odisha. She's a tribal woman who's only studied up to class 5, but the knowledge that she has on millets and the amount of work that she's done to conserve and promote land races of millets is truly inspiring and amazing, and the number of people that she has taught as well. So I think we need our scientific establishment also to open its doors to people like that.
Yes. So is there anybody else who would like to respond to this with their experience in this field?
So just moving forward to the second question from what Dr. Swaminathan answered about informal learning systems, about women being viewed as beneficiaries and not stakeholders. I think this happens, you can see this in academia. Often when we talk of the two-body problem, we are talking of hiring a scientist couple, right? These are professionally well-matched couples, both are PhDs, and they need a job in the same city. If you notice, and there's a Stanford study I've quoted in the book, that even among professionally well-matched couples, when two bodies or two scientists are hired, it's overwhelmingly that the male scientist is hired first. And the woman scientist is hired as the plus one, so to speak, for want of a better term. So again, she's being viewed as a beneficiary in the system, and not that she's a skilled human resource that needs to be retained in the system. Therefore, a lot of how academia chooses to approach this stakeholder beneficiary discrepancy is by framing it, and you talked about how we have to change the language around this, is by framing it as a rescue mission, as a savior, as a favor. We're retaining women in STEM, or he gets a faculty job, but then she can get a fellowship, or she can work as a teacher, she can work as, sorry to say, but science communicator. I self-identify as a science communicator, but a lot of women end up in such roles, which again become temporary, precarious, and so on. So the two-body problem can't be framed as a woman's problem to be retained in the workforce. It's the workforce's problem to retain highly skilled professionals.
Thank you for pointing that out. It's quite important. We are looking at now women taking up more leadership roles, and I want to kind of, we're just seeing that happen. And with the advent of AI, new innovations happening, startup culture, we want to see more women in leadership positions. We want to see more women leading these organizations, these startups. I want to pose a question to the panel, more like wishful thinking. What do you see happening if women come up in these leadership positions, that we become the first choice, not the second choice? How do you see it benefiting the country overall? Anyone can take that up.
I don't mind having a go at this. I think one thing that we've all been talking about so far, in an ideal world, if this happens the right way, where it's not just some women coming up, but we're able to create an atmosphere where women across demographics, across underrepresented communities, castes, abilities, and even non-cis people are all given this level playing field. If we are able to, I think what ultimately can happen is that we will start seeing science itself differently. If I didn't know about this China example that Dr. Samya brought up, but it's very exciting uh, because I've always wondered why, for so in our pursuit of becoming this global leader in science and tech, we become very unimaginative and disengaged from society. All we can think of when we think of science is quantum, AI, space, genomics. Why don't we see science in agriculture? Why don't we see science in forestry, in nutrition, public infrastructure, in education? So I think if we have a more diverse scientific ecosystem, then that is what the best, I think that is the best that can happen in our world, where we see that we see value in all of these things, and not just in very few hyped up things. And I do want to appreciate MSSRF for showing so many examples of how they can be done, and probably in a very underrated way, because even as a science journalist myself, it's not always a place. I don't like, I also get stuck in the TIFRs and the NCBSs, and I don't always think of MSSRF, but there's so much of, with respect at least to agriculture and the biosciences, there's so much of a refreshing different way of looking and recognizing science. And I think that's where diversity can really help us.
May I come in? I firmly believe that despite, us acknowledging that many women can be like men, I do feel that, if there are more women in leadership in all fields in general, it will be a kinder, gentler world. There'll be less wars, less of everything, less violence, less of this running after, profits rather than looking at human welfare. You will see this, from all the women who gravitate towards biology. I don't think it's what men say that, they don't need math and biology, it's easier. So that's why the women go there. It's a choice, because how women have been forced to think, let us say, is relationally, because of their roles where they look after families, children, and they can't think, have tunnel vision. They simply have not been allowed to have tunnel vision. So I think it's, if the same experience, the problem solving, I think, will be much better, because they will be bringing those skills and those, somebody mentioned multitasking, etc., also to give different solutions, to the problems that we face. I'll just give a very small example. Way back, I worked on the issue of deforestation and women in forestry. And it was crystal clear that while men favored eucalyptus, which was where you could produce paper pulp and the trees grew in 6 years and you could get a profit very quickly. And a lot of farmers turned fertile land to growing eucalyptus. The women preferred fruit trees, shade trees, for fuel wood, etc. So they would have much, wanted to that people spent, and the government spent their money on trees like those. But the power was with the men. So I think those are the challenges that we really have. Where does the power lie? In STEM also, as somebody said, okay, quantum, this, that. And you're a nobody if you don't go into those things, right? It's a very difficult battle. It's really, I feel almost like that, Sisyphus, having to keep climbing up. People will say, yes, we understand, these are good ideas, etc., etc. But then they go back to the if you look at what's happening to OpenAI company, a lot of people who understand the ethical risks in what is happening are leaving the company, but it's not making a dent on how things are going to move forward. So a huge reorientation is needed, I feel, and that reorientation may come is possible that it may come through women and other minorities, people with other gender identities who have had to see the world differently.
Thank you so much for those points. It's yeah, I wanted to end on a little bit of a positive note and try to see what would happen if. So thank you so much for your comments, and I think we can move to the questions now. We have a few comments as well as questions. I'd like the panel to also check the chat box if possible. Probably Deepa, I could call upon if you'd like to share your video and ask the question that you've asked in the chat box.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Deepa. I'm with the British Council, and Dr. Ravindra, thank you so much for mentioning Gati. It feels really good to hear you speak about it. My question to the panel was, in the current environment, the international development upheaval that is going on, what are your thoughts about whether it is going to affect progress on the issues and responses to women in science? Basically, I just wanted to get your sense of that. Thank you.
So maybe I can start. I think you're talking about recent geopolitical upheavals, right? So I think that what I worry about really is not the geopolitical upheavals, but the narrative that's changing on science, the role of science in society, and the doubts that are being created in the minds of people on things like climate change or on things like the efficacy and safety of vaccines. And these are being done by people in powerful positions who have a lot of followers. And the results of some of these anti-vax kind of, sentiments are already being felt, already being seen in terms of increasing outbreaks of vaccine preventable diseases in certain parts of the world and so on. The other, of course, is with the rise of AI and technology today, the AI generated deep fakes are very, very difficult to distinguish from the true person. And therefore, I think it's a huge risk actually to science, because you can put forward you can use anybody's image and put forward views which may be completely, someone's used my image and put forward an ad for some, absolutely unscientific treatment for diabetes. Someone brought it to my attention, and it has a very realistic video of me speaking with a WHO logo behind me, spouting utter nonsense about diabetes. But it's very difficult to know that that wasn't me actually speaking. And a lot of people would believe that and say, okay, the former chief scientist of WHO says that, this is the way to cure your diabetes. And so let's try that. Somebody's benefiting out of it. Now, I did write to YouTube that was taken off, but essentially what happens is that once that video is out there in the domain, even if YouTube pulls it down, apparently it can keep circulating in other networks, social media networks. So there is really it's a huge challenge. And I think the only way is for governments to come together and create some kind of a rule-based framework. And the tech companies, the big tech companies, have a huge responsibility here, which they need to actually, the rules and need to be there on the global governance and ethics of AI and the use of AI, particularly in public communication and on social media. So that's what I worry about. Otherwise one can worry about a lot of things, but when you look at also the funding that's going down for science in general, luckily, our part of the world seems to be okay, but these kind of things do have cascading impacts. Many Indian labs suffered as a result of the stoppage of funding from the NIH and so on. I'll stop there.
I think it was also funding for inclusivity, so
yes, the word DEI, diversity, inclusion, gender, all these words have to be now removed.
Yeah, that's also
to get
been
US government funding. Yes.
Yeah, it's progressively being withdrawn. So, whatever gender balances were happening, I think might slip back again. So that's another big worry in terms of the new trends that we are seeing. Hopefully, as Dr. Swaminathan said, India is still sort of protected, but very soon people can quote the same reasons and excuses to pull back, and everything that we are talking about, institutional responsibility. People may not feel that it's important to do the things to empower more and more people to become economic agents, social participants, etc.
Thank you for your response. I hope that answers your question, Deepa. Meher, you have your hand raised. Would you like to share your question? You're on mute.
It's been a fascinating discussion so far. Thoroughly enjoyed it. I have one point to make. And I would like us to go back to school. When we are taught science at school level, certain messages are passed, whether they are conscious or unconscious, that engineering is not for girls, or orthopedic surgery is not for girls, or whatever are these messages are passed on at school age. So I think it's important that the teachers of schools are sensitized to, from a gender perspective, because otherwise everything you do at the top happen at higher education happens later. But if these biases are ingrained in mindsets, then how will a girl wants to take up boxing as a sport or rugby as a sport, and she is told that no, these sports are not meant for girls, so you should do skipping. So these are all biases that we have, and they begin very early. So I think we should target primary school kids and the teachers who teach at that level, that there is nothing that can not be done by women and girls. Thank you.
I absolutely agree with that. And that's something that not only school level, you see it even at medical college level when choosing specializations, pathology, microbiology, community medicine, of course, obstetrics and gynecology for different reasons. But these are all women's specialities. Orthopedic surgery itself are often, what the boys take. So this is certainly a very true fact that percolates through even advanced education.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response on that. And yes, I think we're trying to address bias at every level, and there is education obviously plays a huge role in doing so. And one of the comments has also pointed out to kind of name the problem. To name problems of caste, class, other divides, and more explicitly center them. This is quite pertinent as well, to kind of call out the bias and then move forward from there to address it and to not be affected by it and limit ourselves from it. I think one question that's come in the chat box is about financial planning. I did ask a question on entrepreneurship. It would have been nice to go a little deeper with that question, but also financial planning is something that women are generally kept out of, or it is a male-centered responsibility in the household. How important it is it to involve more women in financial planning, and thereby would that support them further to take up more entrepreneurial roles?
Can I quickly answer this only because it is the theme of this year's part of the theme of this year's International Day for Women and Girls in Science. So I want to make sure that we answer this. And I think my point is maybe not exactly what they meant, but I did want to, I do feel it's important. First of all, it's really refreshing to see finance in the theme. It's not something you naturally think of when we talk about women in science, but it is really, really important in the Indian context. And it's not just about procuring funding, which is also important. And I think people are trying their best under whatever limitations we have. But it is equally important in our context to also equip women and all scientists, really, all researchers to survive with the minimal funding and to survive with developing a sort of support system and skills to manage issues in this dispersal, which is a very, very, very serious issue, which keeps coming to the fore every year. And we need our researchers, especially in smaller places which may not have, situations where the institute can temporarily support them. Those kind of support structures may not be available, but how can we help them not help their science not get disrupted simply because they're not receiving funds in times? How can we make sure that our researchers have enough knowledge about the policy and even the legal framework? When do they know they're within their rights to to say this is unacceptable, and if there is any legal recourse they take, because there are numerous PhD students who don't have the financial cushion to survive if they don't get their monthly very small stipends. So I just, when we're talking about finance, I mean, one constructive way I felt was if there was something we could do, because there are tips and tricks. I covered the story and ran a questionnaire on scientists with scientists about 3 years back, and I found out that there are these very interesting strategies, tips and tricks that scientists do to minimize the disruption in their science. Like, it could be something super specific, like a geneticist said that I started using nanobodies over more expensive antibodies for cloning, or another said that she loads in all funds on the first year so that I don't really get the technical aspects of it, but things that are working for people. Can we get this knowledge accessible even to the young people in not working in places where there might be a support structure? That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yes.
Anyone would like to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, institutions, for example, we have these large R&D offices, and women are often the last to hear of projects and things like that. But again, many women don't know how to spend money. Men know how to spend money. Women often get grants, which they often have to give back because they weren't able to. Now, I'm not advocating that women do what men do, which is spend money on frivolous stuff or on self consumption and things like that, simply because the money has to be spent. But I think training, or by even these R&D offices of large institutions, small institutions, of how to handle finances, how to navigate those finances, good guidelines would be quite important. Because I have noticed that again, because of lack of networks, women often don't get to know a lot of things early in their careers. They don't have the courage, or maybe they don't have time, etc. And it's only much later that they realize all the lost opportunities. So I think these, again, it's something, a responsibility of the institution to take steps to equalize circumstances and equip them with skills, which they can do.
I would just add absolutely spot on, Dr. Ravinder. What it takes to spend money in the Indian institutional ecosystem relies a lot on what we call jugaad, or knowing people and knowing vendors, and faculty pooling resources, which naturally male scientists who have more time and more networks would be able to access. Streamlining institutional measures itself would remove this bias. It shouldn't require anything more than the standard process.
Yeah.
And also, I think it's a trial and error process. I can say for me personally, coming in first initially as a researcher and then becoming PIs in projects. So made mistakes and then realized, okay, there are certain ways that you can correct them. So like you said, those learnings are very important, and maybe a peer support system which captures those learnings would be really important, because it's learning on the job. So it's not necessarily a male bias, it's just uh, the naivete of being a new PI. I would put it more like that.
It's not a male bias, but again, speaking from lived experiences in this institution for 30 years, is that suppose, let's say, a male gets hired, he will already know other assistant professors, or maybe see other seniors, and will quickly connect with them. Their mobility on campus is not restricted. Nobody will ask whose house he's going to, did he go at night, did he go during the day, etc. But women face all those barriers, and so they only start to get themselves equipped maybe halfway through their assistant professor career. And as you would know, it's important for them to set up labs. At the same time, they're navigating marriage and motherhood. And a lot of women are making a trade-off between not having the kinds of personal lives that they might want to in terms of partnership or children. They bear the costs, of the trade-off. Especially, I find, if they aspire for institutions which are top level institutions, because the entry criteria there are much steeper. People need 2 postdocs, not just 1 postdoc. And people need prestigious postdocs from foreign universities or top institutions like ISCs. If they don't tick those boxes, it's unlikely that, and that is how we explain the very low numbers in institutions like mine, the IITs, 11% faculty across IITs. So there is gatekeeping. There is plenty of evidence of gatekeeping also, because we know who's in power. So I think a lot of these things, the more transparent, how do you get the research across? How do you get relevant people to reach the research, enter those rooms? Would DST listen? Would IIT Council listen? So they are the ones who need to make the changes. We find that, even the exam like the JEE might have some gender biases. For example, negative marking. Women tend to answer questions. They are very sure of the answers. Men will answer all questions. In the end, they will end up with more marks, while the women who might have better knowledge will end up with lesser marks and not be able to enter that institution. So these are underlying structural biases, which I think people who reinvent the JEE exam also need to have a gender perspective on it. They may be responding to other problems like coaching centers and this and that, but there is no gender lens on most things. And it's necessary, and a broader diversity lens, I think.
I think we come back to the first discussion. Even before the webinar started, we were talking about Invisible Women, and that everyone needs to read that book, scientists, architects, designers, everyone. And yeah, I think we've had some really great perspectives coming in today. We've had some good comments coming in the chat as well. There's Kanvi who's asked about her personal like career break, and thank you, Karishma, for sharing your email and perhaps helping her out in that regard. So with that, I think we're coming to an end of our session. Thank you so much for all the panelists, for the lovely feedback, for the lovely points that you've made today. And this session is recorded, so it will be accessible for others as well who perhaps missed it or want to refer back to it. Thank you. And it's International Day for Women and Girls in Science. Thank you so much for celebrating this day with us. With that, I'd like to end the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you to Gayatri and Shreya and Professor Swaminathan
Thank
for
you very much.
hosting this.
Thank you to all of you and all the participants.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.